Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar on buying French property and living in France. My name is Karen Tate, I'll be your host for the next hour. For the past 20 odd years, I've been editing French property magazine in the UK, and I'm also a freelance journalist contributing to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined tonight, or today, if you're listening to us from America. So I am joined by our expert panelists who are all ready and waiting to answer your questions. If you have a question during the webinar, there should be a box to the right of your screen. You can post it there. So firstly, I'll pass over to our panelists who can introduce themselves. Joanna?
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Joanna Leggett, so I'm one of the Leggett family from Leggett Immobilier. We've been established 25 years now. All of our agents work and live in France, including myself. So we're able to help you with the whole process from whichever country you're coming from. And we've got properties all over France and sort of just under 700 agents all over France. So hopefully we'll be able to help you and answer any of your questions tonight. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Joanna. Sharon?
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Revol. I'm a French mortgage broker for KFP. I lead a team of 12 mortgage brokers specialised in finance for non-residents and international clients. We can deal with customers all over the world, so hopefully I'll be able to help answer some of your questions this evening. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks Sharon. And Paulette?
Hi everybody, my name is Paulette Booth. I'm the co-founder and director of Agence AXA International. We're a dedicated English-speaking agency covering the whole of France. The majority of my staff, including myself, have been through the relocation process over to France, so we know what it's like, we know what you're going through, and we're there to help you with any of your insurance and healthcare needs.
Thanks, Paulette. And Tracy?
Hi everybody, and Happy New Year. We can still say that here in France. Thrilled to be back here again amongst all of the amazing experts and hopefully helping you make the next step to move into France. LBS was set up in 2012 to help people like yourselves who want to move, live or have a business in France. So here we are. If you need our help, do reach out to us and look forward to answering your questions tonight.
Thanks, Tracy. And Jonathan?
Yes, thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I'm a currency dealer here at Lumon. Lumon are an international payment specialist. So I've been here for 15 years of our 25 years of trading. Last year, we trusted with over £7 billion worth of currency for our clients. So I'm very interested in the FX markets. I've also been quoted in the press talking about the world of currency. So one of the things I like to do in these webinars is actually find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So you should see a poll on your screen now, just in relation to when you might be starting to look at property in France. You might be over in France now, you might be completing viewings online, you might have some plans to go out in the summer. But yes, buying property in France doesn't happen overnight, as I'm sure you'll be aware. So it's just quite helpful for us to get some information regarding what stage in that sort of viewing and buying process you might be at, just so we can share important information regarding where that process is for you and what might be relevant for you at some of the different stages that you'll be going to. So the property buying process in France takes really anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. So yes, it's helpful for us to understand that information. So thank you very much, everyone who has answered that poll. I'm going to launch our second one, just in relation to the financial aspect. Certainly that can be very important in terms of the currency side of things. So you should see a poll on your screen now in relation to the time period within which you're financially prepared to put forward an offer. When you're buying a French property, there will be, as with most property transactions all over the world, a deposit stage called the compromis de vente, and then you get a later stage, the active one. That could be some 3 months, 2 months later. So understanding when you'd be financially ready for that. There can be different currency options that we like to share with people relating to your budget, helping you with the timing of those purchases of currency, and also the ability to lock rates in advance so you know exactly what you're paying and you don't get any nasty surprises if rates start to go the wrong way, which they can do sometimes. So thank you very much, everyone who's answered that poll. Our third poll is just going to be in relation to whereabouts you're looking in France. Of course, France is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. I was doing a bit of research on this. There was over 100 million people travelled to France as a tourist in 2023. So yes, the world's most popular tourist destination. Why is that? Because there's such variety there. So with these webinars, it's quite helpful for us to get some information on where you might be looking. I can see a lot of people looking in the southwest Charente, beautiful part of France. Also, a lot of people interested in the Alps, of course, this time of year, very, very important for that. And Limoges, the Dordogne, we do see a lot of clients buying there. So yeah, quite a mixed bag across all the regions, which is what we would expect. So I'm sure everyone's going to find something really, really useful from the webinar. And then our final poll, thank you very much for your patience, audience and panelists, while we do this, just in relation to where you're from, where you're joining us from today. Of course, the buying process in France is exactly the same wherever in the world you're from. But there can be little nuances, certainly in relation to obviously currency and banking and some other factors for us to consider if you're in, say, the UK or the US or somewhere else in the world. So yes, a high proportion from the UK and the US as we'd expect. And we'll certainly be tailoring this to those clients. So thank you very much, everyone who's answered those polls. And I'll pass back to Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So let's get started on the questions.
Just myself, I just forgot me there, Karen, to introduce myself quickly.
Sorry?
That's all right, I didn't introduce myself, I'll just introduce myself quickly. Yeah,
I'm so sorry, Jake. I should wear my glasses, shouldn't I? Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, no problem. So my name's Jake Barber. I'm the co-founder and director of SGB Global. We specialise in helping expats with international financial planning. So main areas we deal with is retirement planning. We give pension advice for Americans and Brits, and also estate planning. So one of the big areas we help with is mainly the issues surrounding cross-border, because once you leave your home country, there are a lot more issues that can develop. So we just try and simplify things as much as possible, dealing in those particular areas. So yeah, I'm looking forward to running through the questions today.
Thanks, Jake, and sorry again, it's vanity not wearing my glasses. I skipped over your name, but thank you. Very
it's probably
important.
because Johnny was doing the questions, yeah, no worries.
So, okay, we'll get on to the questions now, and it's one for Joanna, a buying question we'll start off with. Lee Lewis wants to know, what is the market like for properties with land and within commuting distance from Paris, less than 1 hour? And I have a feeling you're going to say it's not cheap.
Well, it depends where you are. I mean, an hour from Paris, yes, in central Paris, you're unlikely to get land because, as you know, it's the centre of Paris. But an hour outside Paris, there's lots of opportunities. There's some lovely places that we have, like in Val d'Oise. We've got Essonne, Seine-et-Marne. There's lots of properties with long, big bits of land, but also it depends on how much land you need. But Normandy, for example, is only an hour and a half from Paris, and that's where there's some really big equestrian estates, because Normandy is very popular for equestrian properties. And again, literally an hour and a half's drive, or on the train even less. So it depends. An hour outside of Paris, you will definitely get properties. The French don't tend to commute as much as us Brits do. For example, when I used to live in London, it might take me an hour and a half to get to work. The French tend to be 20 minutes from where they live. So an hour outside of Paris will probably be a lot cheaper than you're actually expecting. But we've got lots of properties on our website that are an hour outside Paris. But I wouldn't rule out Normandy, because it's only half an hour more and you'll get huge good value for money properties there.
That's a very good point. I always forget how close Normandy is. That's why so many Parisians have got holiday homes there,
Exactly,
isn't it? 'Cause
yeah.
they can just go for the weekend so easily. So very good advice there. Right, okay. As usual, we have lots of people wanting to know about visas and residency. So I've got one here for Tracy from John Rosevier, who says, my main questions are about residency rules. How long can we stay in the property each visit, or how many visits before we have to apply for residency? Initially, we're looking to visit maybe 4 times a year for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, maybe longer in the summer months. And he says he can work remotely. And Tim Henderson also wants any information regarding staying more than the 90 days.
Okay, excellent. So very good questions, John and Tim. So how long can you stay? Each visit really depends on how long you've been previously staying, of course, because you're currently on the 9180 rule, which means, of course, once you've stayed 90 days, you have to leave for 90 days. If you really want to spend more time in France and you don't want to have to worry about counting those days, because it is very restrictive, then the simplest option, of course, is to go for a 6-month tourist visa. The 6-month visa is not a residency visa, so it's very much used for secondary residence. So you can buy your second home and then just request a 6-month visa and spend 6 months in 12 rather than the 9180 rule. You just need to be aware that, of course, it's 6 months in 12 and that you don't stay longer than 6 months. So for the second homeowners, that's the best way to go. So I think it was Tim who was asking for extra options other than the 90 days. That would be the way to do it. If you don't have that 6-month visa, of course, it will be on the 90-day rule. Effectively, yes, if it's spread out all of the year, like you said, 2 to 3 weeks, I think you said, every now and again, that would be fine. If you come in and go in 2 to 3 weeks, then you're leaving for a month or so and coming back, that would work under the 9180. Where you may have the difficulty, John, is in the summer months if you want to stay longer. So yes, maybe go for that 6-month visa, which you apply from country of origin, whether it's the UK or the US, I'm not sure where you're calling from. So you apply from country of origin. It's not a residency visa, so it's renewable in the country of origin. And I heard at the very end there, you said something about remote working. I think I should just mention that here for anybody listening, so that everybody knows there's no such thing in France as a nomad visa, and there's no such thing as just popping into France and remote working. Actually, if you're working in France, the legality here is that you have to have the appropriate working visa. So do be careful what you're thinking of doing on a remote basis. Hope that answers those questions for you.
That's great. Thanks, Tracy. So for those people who just want to enjoy a holiday home and spend up to 3 months at a time in Europe, in France, within Europe, they don't need to worry about applying for a longer visa.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. So there's been a lot of media coverage over the past week about Spanish PM Pedro Sanchez's proposal for putting 100% tax on property purchases by non-EU nationals. And I guess it's not surprising that a lot of people are wondering whether other EU countries with similar housing shortages. Oh, your cat, Tracy. So,
I'm so sorry, my cat. I'm so sorry.
I love a cat on a webinar. Sorry, so I was saying, yes, very serious subject about whether other EU countries with similar housing shortages and problems may follow suit. I should add that at the moment it is very much only a proposal in Spain. It hasn't been voted into law or anything yet, but understandably people are a little anxious. So we've heard from Clues Everard, Mike McLean, John and Kath Parker and Nancy Holtzner, who would all like to know if there's any indication that France may be considering something similar or making it more challenging for expats to buy in France. So as that's a tax subject, Jake, would you like to tackle that and maybe give an overview of France's tax situation?
Yeah, well, so I live in Spain, so the news with Pedro Sanchez, of course, was in the news here, and he's trying to impose 100% tax on the value of properties for non-EU residents, which would include Brits. And that's to tackle the housing crisis, which of course is an issue in a lot of areas, especially places like France, Spain, Mediterranean countries, where you get a lot of tourists going to those areas or people buying holiday homes. So if you look at the actual sales last year in Spain, 15% came from non-Spanish residents, but only 8% of those were Brits, which was down from 38% in 2008. The big issue is actually EU residents. You know, most of those are bought from other EU countries, but is it going to come in France? There have been 2 other countries that have done something like this. So Canada, for example, you cannot buy a property in Canada if you're not a Canadian resident. In Denmark as well, they introduced something where you can only buy a property in Denmark if you are a permanent resident or you've been there for at least 5 years. So it's not the first country to do this, and would it be the last? I don't know. But I think a bigger issue that should be tackled is the issue surrounding people not wanting to do long-term rentals, because Airbnb, of course, is a really profitable business for a lot of people. So what you often see is people just doing short-term rentals for 9 months, and then you've got to move somewhere for the summer months because they make more money in those months than they do in the other 9, and then you've got to find somewhere else. So it pushes the prices up, and it just makes it really difficult for people to rent. And yeah, it just becomes a big issue. But it's unlikely that this will be passed in Spain because Sanchez is not very popular, and you know, it's quite an extreme thing which the opposing opposition is probably not going to say yes to. But it could start a trend with other countries doing something similar. There is something that it has to be tackled, but maybe there are other ways to do it as opposed to increasing taxes just on one part of the population, because non-EU residents seems a bit extreme. Why not do it for everyone? You know, if you're from a certain country, you're allowed to buy a property without the tax, but somewhere else you're not.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a complex situation, isn't it, with all the different solutions being put forward for the housing crises in these countries. As you say, there's no signs at present that France is looking to do anything similar. It's a kind of watch this space, and yes, watch this space and see whether Sanchez gets it voted through. Seems very unlikely to me, or proposes anything else. So let's move on to another question. Thanks, Jake. That was a very good answer. Let's move on to a currency one for Jonathan, which this seems quite simple in comparison. Brian Smart wants to know, what's the best way to make international money transfers, and are there different options?
Okay, well, that's easy. Make your money transfers with Lumon, of course. That's the best thing to do. Yes, there are definitely different options. So most clients, sort of first port of call would typically be their bank. So if I do a comparison against the bank, so what are the benefits of Lumon over a typical bank for your international transfers? Well, number one, it's exchange rates. We can actually demonstrate savings over the banks in terms of the rates that we can offer. We do like a mystery shopper every so often, every few months, looking at some of the average sort of high street banks out there, and then our average rates, our typical rates, and the difference is about 1 to 2 cents. So that can really add up, particularly when you're talking about large 6, maybe even 7-figure sums, even on a 5-figure sum, you know, on £10,000, that's an extra 100 or 200 euros. So not just the purchase price, but the future payments, renovations. You might be bringing money back to the UK at some point, and those savings would carry through. So number one, it's exchange rates, but it's also the sort of service and the experience that we have in dealing with French property transactions. So the first step with Lumon, it is to register. That sets you up with an account, a trading account, that is. It's not a bank account, although you do have access to what we call a Euro wallet as soon as you're registered. Now, it can be quite tricky actually opening a bank account in France. With some of the banks, you've got to wait until you've signed your acte de vente to completion. That takes, say, 2 or 3 months. Paulette can actually help on the banking. She can help you with the bank account when you sign the compromis de vente, but it's not always easy in those early stages. With Lumon, you get access to this Euro wallet, and you can use that to pay the notaire for your payments for the purchase. That's much easier than using a typical bank. You know, banks in France, it's a bit like in the UK. If you're moving a large sum of money, you sometimes got to go into the bank, book an appointment. With Lumon, we can send a large amount of money instantly, very easily after a couple of security checks. Also, you have our service. So, as I said earlier, I've done this 15 years. I can't tell exactly what the market's going to do. No one on this planet can do that. But what I can do is tell you some of the trends in the market, some of the forecasts that are out there, and just really keep you updated. So there's a huge amount going on in the world at the moment with the new man in the White House, a bit of pressure on Keir Starmer the pound looking a bit shaky as we enter 2025. So there's constantly things happening in the world that affect the currency markets, and my team and I can sort of share with our clients all the latest news to try and help them make a decision. So benefits of us: number one, exchange rates; number two, it's some of the options that we can help with; and then number three, the service to just look after you and keep you updated. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. One of the things that a lot of people worry about when they move to France is healthcare. So this one's for Paulette. Sarah Collins wants to know about healthcare for people who want to retire to France.
Okay, so first of all, I suppose when you say retired, is it officially retired or early retired? And the difference that makes is, say, for example, if you're coming from an EU country or the UK, is you've got what's called an S1. So if you're entitled to that S1, you've then got reciprocal healthcare between the two countries. But if you're retiring at 55 and coming over, you know, to retire, then so you're technically, well, you're retired, but you haven't got the access for that S1. So the difference for that starts with your application for a visa, which of course Tracy can help you with. And it depends then, do you need healthcare to accompany, a healthcare policy to accompany the visa application? So if you've got your S1, no, because that is your healthcare that accompanies the visa application. But if you're retiring at 50, 55 or wherever, yes, so that will start with a cover to bring you over to France. Even if you've got the S1 coming over to France, we would still recommend a temporary cover, because you can register for the French system, but it's not going to take a day. And a really good example, quite a horrific example I can use for that, is we did have a client who came from the US, and she had a temporary insurance policy with us. She actually got hit by a car crossing a zebra crossing on the second day after she'd arrived, bless her. And she was obviously really quite poorly, and she was in hospital for weeks, and the policy covered her. So, you know, even if she'd have been able to access straight away the health French system and register, it wouldn't have happened on day two. So, you know, even if you can apply straight away, it's invaluable having something just temporary in place for accidents and emergencies. In terms of the health system itself in France, for me, compared to my friends and family in the UK, it's fabulous. It's really, really good. Especially, I mean, I live in Toulouse, and I remember going to have my gallbladder removed, and the consultant just opening a paper diary and flicking forward 2 weeks and saying, "I can fit you in then, is that okay?" And I was astounded. You know, it's such a difference, instead of like being sent home and waiting for a letter to come in the post of when you've come to the top of the waiting list 2 years later. So, you know, the system is in most areas, it's under pressure in some areas, but in most areas it's really, really good. It's not free at point of access, but you do get part of it refunded through Social Security once you're in the system, and then the rest is swept up by what's called a mutual top-up policy. They vary. There's massive. I think we've got about 60 different versions of a mutual top-up policy to fit everybody's situation and your budget. Yeah. So there we go. Really, I mean, healthcare in France can be, I could probably spend 2 hours explaining it. So there we are, as short as I can.
Great. Thanks, Paulette. I'm sure that's very reassuring for a lot of people, and a very good point about making sure you're covered when you first come over to France. It can be very easy just to think, oh, you know, I'll be okay for a couple of months. But as your example showed, better to be safe than sorry. So we've got one for Sharon now, a mortgages question from Chris Sukach. I bet I've pronounced that wrong, Sukach. Can you please explain the process for an American to get a mortgage for a French property?
Okay, yes, Chris, I will try and explain for you. American or not American, there are some slight differences as you're American, if you're an American resident or if you're an American person living somewhere else. So I will presume that you are an American nationality living in the US. First of all, the first step is to find out how much you can borrow. Not all banks will be able to lend to you or want to lend to you because you're based in the US, because they have to comply with FATCA regulation, which is basically reporting, etc. there are things that they can do and there are things that they can't do. It's an extra level of paperwork and admin for banks when they're dealing with a US resident. However, that said, there are banks that will lend. So the first step is to find out actually how much you can borrow and to make sure that the conditions of mortgages available are acceptable and in line with your project. Depending on where you're buying in France, there will be different mortgages available as well, because France, the banking and the mortgage lending system can be quite regional as well. So there are national lenders and then there are regional lenders as well. So the first step is really to find out what's available in terms of mortgages for you. Then once you've found a property, so you can do all of that obviously before finding a property, which puts you in a better position to go and visit properties with the Leggett agents and prove that you're finance worthy, so to speak, which puts you in a better position then to when you make an offer on a property. When you come to apply for the mortgage, with pretty much all of the banks, everything can be done at a distance. There is no need to travel to and from France every time you need to do something for your mortgage. The majority of banks, as you're based in the US, will be on a paper-based process, i.e. they will need you to send paperwork back by post. We can submit all of the mortgage application documents like soft copy via the API systems, all online through secure processes. But when it comes to things such as the mortgage offer, that will be issued to you in a paper version and sent to you by DHL. So once you actually come to apply for the mortgage, we apply for the mortgage. The process in France takes about 6 weeks from beginning to end, and the French banks will open a bank account for you at the same time to service the mortgage. In France, we don't have just dry mortgages, which is standalone, and then you use kind of your own bank account in the US or elsewhere. So they will set you up with a mortgage and a bank account at the same time. When you complete on the mortgage, i.e. when you have your mortgage offer, there is an 11-day cooling off period, which you have to respect before you can return the mortgage offer to the bank. And then once that's done, and the bank has that, you can then complete on your property purchase. So the actual mortgage process takes about 6 weeks. First of all, you have to find out what you qualify for, then you apply, then you get the mortgage offer, and then you complete on the purchase. So I've tried to keep it quite simple, but that's the process in a nutshell.
That's great, thanks Sharon. So let's have another property one for Joanna. Peter Jackson wants to know about what are the typical property overheads per year, and what is the equivalent to council tax and average costs. So do you think you can give an overview of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's how long is a piece of string? It's like, you know, it depends on your area, where you live. There's all sorts of things that apply. It depends on which country you're coming from. If you're coming from the UK, for example, and probably the States, the cost of living is pretty much the same. I mean, EDF is in the UK as well as France for electricity. So the cost of things like electricity aren't going to be any different. The difference might be that you might have a bigger house in France. So you might want to look at that, because a lot of people that do move over, particularly if you were coming from somewhere like London with a 2-bedroom apartment, you might be moving to a chateau, so for the same price. So those are the things you've got to take into account, is the land. I mean, I made this mistake when I first moved over, by buying a property with too much land, and then realised, oh my God, the grass the grass is going to need cutting. And there's no way I'm going to spend 4 hours myself doing it, you know, going around fields and everything else. So you've got to bear those sort of things into account as well when you're looking at cost of living. France is huge. You know, how far are you from the local shops? You know, I can't walk to a shop from my house. It's 7 kilometres, so I've got to drive. So you take those things into consideration as well. As far as taxes are concerned, if you live in France permanently, they've now got rid of the tax habitation. So if you're a French resident, you only pay taxe foncière. And the things that taxe foncière include are your local taxes, which will include your rubbish collection or your rubbish bins if you have to take the rubbish. And depending on what services are offered, you know, it depends on the cost that you're going to be paying, and however much land you have as well will be on the costs that you'll be paying. But what I have found that in almost all cases, it's a lot cheaper than it is in the UK. I don't know what the taxes are in America, because I know we have a lot of USA clients listening tonight. So I'm not sure on the taxes there, but it is a lot cheaper than the UK. The cost of living, yeah, you know, you can go to the markets and get fantastic vegetables completely fresh. In the supermarkets, it's generally in season. But I would say it's not going to be that much different to whichever country you're coming from these days. Wine is very cheap, so I can highly recommend that. And also cheese, that will be a lot cheaper, the wine and cheese. But again, it depends on what you're buying and the size of the property you're buying. And I would say that most people that buy and move over for a residential home buy a lot bigger property than they had in the UK.
Thanks, Joanna. That's a good point, you know, about the size of property. That might surprise some people that they are spending more. And also, it's maybe, you know, yeah. So it's one of those things to think about when you're on your property hunt, whether you actually really need a property that size. There's a lot of cleaning to do as well in those big chateaus. So let's move on now. Yeah, let's move on now to another one for Tracy. This is from Geraint Butler, who says, I'm going to retire in 2 years. I'm looking to move my whole family to France, wife, daughter, son, son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren. We'd like to start a business providing retreats for emergency workers and veterans. What is the best visa to apply for with that in mind? When is the best time to start the visa application? How much detail needs to go into business plan? And also the family would like to work in the business, so what visas do they need? So that's quite a complicated situation. So good luck for answering it.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. So if you all want to just go home now, I'll just stay on the call here because we could take up the rest of the time from this one and longer. So yes, to be fair, I will try and give you some answers to those questions, which are very important. So anybody listening to this will find some value in it. But of course, so many questions, and on a project of that size, you really need to book a consultation with me so we can really dig down deep. But yes, the project sounds fabulous, but is huge. So we would take a lot of time to implement it. So you was talking about timelines. So for any business visas, you need to count a minimum of 2 to 3 months. But of course, that's without the preparation of the file. So for this type of project, I would say at least 4 months. That's the first thing I would say. And when it comes to business visas, you know, there is not a huge amount of choice. You've got obviously the liberal visa, which is more of an independent type visa for those who have transferable skills. And then you have the more higher level type of visa, which would be the passport talent category, where there is lots of different categories within the passport talents. And I guess that would be the way to go with your project, because you are multiple people. So I think I heard you say it was, you know, your wife and your daughter and son-in-law, I think it was. So when you've got a project with many people involved, I would imagine this business is going to have different roles. Therefore, it's going to be a limited company. So for a limited company, that means you're going to invest money in that. So the passport talent for an economic business could be the way to go. And I say could because I'd have to dig down a bit deeper on all of this to really give you the proper advice. I do take this quite large. So the passport talents for an economic business could be the path. What do you need for this? Well, you need to have a favourable decision from the DREETs, which is basically you provide them with a business and financial plan. They're going to give you their decision if they think it's viable or not. So of course we'd have to work together and make a viable business project to give to them to give, so they'll give a favourable decision. Once you have that, then you have to request your visa from I guess from the UK. And you'd have to invest a minimum of 30,000. So each founder of the company would invest 30,000 at least. Or you have to have a master's degree or 5 years, or you have to invest 30,000 and have a master's degree or 5 years experience. And of course, you have to have a minimum earnings about 21,000 minimum gross to be able to put on your business plan. So you can see it's not an easy visa category to go in. There is a lot of success with this when the project is correct. So if it's a big project like a retreat business, lots of people involved, a limited company with a passport talent, the advantage of a passport talent would be that if, for example, you have 2 co-founders in a business, the spouses can come along as a family member of that passport talent and don't necessarily have to be working in the business. So don't necessarily have to invest 30,000 in the business. They can come along as a passport family member, and then once they're in France and they get the residency card, they then can work as well. So it's kind of a really good one to have somebody working and somebody coming along with them. So that is kind of the key points of a passport talent project. The 3-year financial and business plan would be needed. Whether you're going for a talent or a liberal visa, you still need to have a business and financial plan. And that plan needs to be a coherent plan. It needs to be one showing, obviously, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, who's going to be involved, what the role will be, and how financially you are going to survive in France. And then, of course, once you come into France and you get your visas, you have to then implement that plan. You can't just then sit on it, because you will have to set up the activity and then reach out to your local prefecture via the validation process, because the visa is what brings you into France, and it's the residency card, the passport residency card, that you will be given by your local prefecture. So it's a 5 or 6 step process that you need to go to with this type of project. It's not something you should go through lightly. So do either reach out to me or somebody else that you want to work with on visas. I think I heard you say something on there about you bringing children with you. So obviously your children don't need to get a business visa. They can come across just on a normal visa. It doesn't get validated in France, but you can reach out once you do have your residency card in France and get them what's called a DCEM. It's kind of a circulation document for underage children. So the children need to be scholarized in France to be able to get their visas. Once you're in France with your visas, the children then get a DCEM. So that then makes them legal, and then once they become of age, they can then get their own resident cards in their own right. And that is something that everybody in France should be thinking about for their children who are now becoming of age as well. So I know that's a lot of information. I'm not sure if I've said it as clearly as I wanted to, because it's a very big project. So as I said at the beginning, if it's something you're very serious about, and it seems to me that you are, because you're thinking 2 years from now, and that is the amount of time you need to put a plan in place, because of course you'll have to find the property, and of course you've got Joanna and all her team can help you with that. Find the right property to be able to then work on the project, because you will have to have the property first if that's the property you're going to use for your retreat business. So hopefully we'll see you in a consultation one of these days.
Thanks, Tracy. That was an awful lot to cover. So well done for managing to get everything covered there.
I'm sure that might have confused more than helped, but hey, well, hopefully.
No, I'm sure you helped, and it just shows, the value of getting professional advice with these more complicated projects. So a text question for Jake now from Kerry Leban, who wants to know, what are the potential pitfalls of renting one's UK home to provide a source of income and buying in France? Particularly, what are the key tax implications to be aware of?
Yeah, so there's many different elements of the tax. So if you're renting out a property in the UK, first of all, it's understanding the double taxation agreement between the UK and France, because the UK property is going to be taxed firstly in the UK, but what you can do is use your personal allowance, which is £12,570. If the property is in joint names, that means, and you're married, that means both of you can use that allowance. So that's just over £25,000 that can be used. France, though, they tax you on your worldwide income. So what a double taxation agreement means is that you don't get taxed in 2 countries. So you can use tax credits from one country to the other. So in France, the personal allowance is lower than the UK, which means if there is no tax to pay in the UK, you could pay tax in France. But if you pay tax in the UK on the income, then and the tax is higher in France, you end up paying the excess in France. Okay, so that's the income tax part. The second would be capital gains. So capital gains would be on the value of the property. So if you bought the property at one value, but then you're going to sell the property at a higher value, that's when you would pay a capital gains. In the UK, there's a very small allowance now. It used to be much bigger, of £3,000. And then after that, the tax rates have gone up recently, but you may end up then paying tax in both countries as well. The third tax to consider is wealth tax. So wealth tax is triggered in France at 1.3 million euros, but you only get 800,000, which is tax-free. So this is a tax on your worldwide properties, which includes UK and France. Starts at 0.5%, goes up to 1.5%. So that's something definitely to bear in mind if you have properties in both France and the UK or elsewhere. The next thing would be inheritance tax. So I have got another question that goes into more detail about wills, but just from a basic point of view, there have been changes towards inheritance tax in the UK. So it used to be very complicated. They had something called domicile of origin, which meant that you were pretty much always going to get taxed in the UK, even if you spent your whole life or most of your life outside. But what's happening in the following tax year, so in 3 months, is they're moving to what's called domicile of residency. So if you're outside of the UK for 10 years, the UK is only going to tax you based on your UK assets. So this includes UK properties. It now also includes workplace and personal pensions. So they now fall under inheritance tax in the UK. So you need to bear in mind that if you do have a property portfolio in the UK, you may end up paying a huge amount of tax in the UK on death, because how it works is you get a personal allowance of £325,000. So as a married couple, it'd be 650. Anything above that's taxed at 40%. So from a planning perspective, what you want to do is try and mitigate or understand the taxes as much as possible, because it's not just looking at one tax, it's looking at all of them combined. And let's just say, for example, you have loads of income from salary, loads of income from rental property, then all of that falls under one tax, one type of tax, income tax, which means you probably end up paying loads of tax at the high end. What you want to do is try and pay different types of taxes. So in France, there's different ways you can invest money, where you can defer the tax. So it's just about utilizing the best structure for yourself, which would include properties as well. And just bear in mind as well, because there was quite a question surrounding how do I do the tax returns. You have to file the tax returns and then potentially get a credit. It is a bit of an annoyance to do that, because if anyone's done that before, it's very, very timely, and HMRC in the UK are very, very slow. Everything's done by post. You can sign them up, but often it takes a long time to get through to someone that you want to speak to. So yeah, there is the pain of having to do that part of the job as well.
Okie dokie, thanks Jake. That's again a lot to think about, but very clearly put. An insurance one now for Paulette. Will my property insurance cover any damage if I rent out my holiday home through Airbnb when I'm not using it?
Okay, so that's a really, really easy one for us to cover. Generally, it's just a clause that we put in the home insurance policy. So first of all, you need to let your insurer know that the property is going to be unoccupied for more than 90 days a year. That's cumulative, it's not per time. So first of all, you need to make sure that one's in there. Then there's just a clause for us to add like public liability insurance into the property insurance. Really, really easy to do, costs probably about an extra €60 a year. It's really not massive. However, if you want to make sure the income you're earning on that property is protected. So for example, you have a fire or water damage, and then you can't rent it out. And you've got bookings and everything, and you're going to lose that income. There is a separate type of policy that we can do, which then covers loss of income for guaranteed events. What you do need to make sure, though, is that the people renting the property have got a public liability insurance. In France, there's a policy called, cover called Responsibility Civil v Privé, and that causes damage or injury that you cause to someone or something. So anybody that's renting the property who lives in France and has got a main home insurance, it's automatically included. So that's fine if they cause damage or injury to your property. Most EU countries also have that. However, if you've got holidaymakers coming from the UK, from the US, from rest of the world, they won't have that as standard. That is actually included in a travel insurance policy. So you do want to make sure that whoever's renting, the property has got that included. For example, if they damage your sofa, I don't know, by jumping on it or something, that's not covered on your home insurance because it's not a guaranteed risk. It's not fire, theft, vandalism. I suppose it sort of is vandalism, but it's not covered under, it's like after a break-in. So you want to make sure that you can claim off them for the damage that they've caused for that. And also take a deposit. I'd really, really recommend taking a deposit too. So
Absolutely.
easy to cover.
Thanks, Paulette. That's really interesting. So moving on for one for Sharon, how are UK buyers affected by Brexit when it comes to getting a mortgage? I've heard that as a UK resident, banks won't lend.
Yes. Well, Brexit has caused a certain number of difficulties for UK buyers when it comes to obtaining mortgages due to the UK leaving Europe without a financial services agreement. When the UK initially left, there was a major panic with UK buyers who found themselves basically unable to obtain a mortgage because, quite simply, the French banks didn't know how to work around the system, how to work the system legally, how to be able to lend to UK borrowers. So they stopped. Thankfully, things have evolved since. We now have lenders in France that will lend to people who they consider to be high net worth individuals, quite restrictive, £150,000 income after tax per borrower. But thankfully, we also have other lenders that have opened up lending. They've worked their processes to be able to lend legally to somebody based in the UK. And there have been some people come to us and say, oh, well, we don't want to borrow 250,000. We've been told the minimum is 250,000 or 300,000. So there are mortgages available to UK residents for as little as, say, 80,000 to 100,000 euros. The processes, again, we're quite often on a paper process. Some banks may require that you come and visit them in France once throughout the process as well. But the good news is that mortgages have become more readily available from a variety of lenders, all of which have slightly different conditions. So if one lender isn't able to help you, then there is another lender who maybe could, and that's the advantage of using a broker. But it's a good news for the UK market because they were the principal people buying in France. I'm British myself. I mean, lots of us here are. So the UK buyers were one of the main buyers in France, and they were overtaken in 2023 by the Belgians, who became the first foreign nationality buying in France. But that was mainly due to the fact that it was much harder for them to get mortgages. So many people's dreams were put on hold. So the good news in 2025 is mortgage borrowing is much more readily available for people in the UK.
That is good to hear. Very good news. Okay, so let's move on to another property one for Joanna. Maya, I'm never going to pronounce this, Maya Kazarowski, apologies to Maya, wants to know, I'm mostly interested in the timeline of the sale from interest through to close and would like suggestions on planning for buying a property.
Okay, sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. Okay, so timelines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So timelines, from when you obviously come out and visit and you see a property that you like and you make an offer and it's agreed, then the compromis de vente is drawn up straight away. The compromis de vente is like an exchange of contracts at the beginning of the sale. So there are some tests that need to be done on the property first before you can sign that. So there are 5 tests. There's sort of lead paint, asbestos, there's electricity, there's septic tanks, there's termites, there's all those sort of tests. They have to be drawn up and attached to that initial contract. The buyer always has to sign first, so the buyer will sign that contract and then it's sent, or can be signed on the same day if you're all together, by the seller. Once the seller has signed the compromis de vente, they can't, the buyer, I mean the seller, sorry, they can't pull out of the sale. So they are then tied into that sale until it completes. The buyer, once they've signed the compromis de vente, has a 10-day cooling off period. So if for whatever reason you changed your mind, or you were in the love of France and then decided, no, I can't really afford this, and change your mind, you have 10 days to do that in. After the 10 days, if you're not pulling out of the contract, then you will have to send your 10% deposit to the notaire's holding account for clients. You can, at the time of putting the initial contract together, you can put in suspensive clauses, like, for example, if you were getting a mortgage from Sharon, you would, one of her banks, you would obviously have to put that as a clause, because if the mortgage was refused, then you could pull out from the contract at no cost. But you would need to stipulate in that compromis, the compromis de vente, which bank and what interest rate you are going for. You might be putting in a request that you want permission to be able to put a swimming pool in. And again, if that was rejected, then you could pull out the sale with no cost later on. But if your suspensive clauses are met, then when it comes to the final act, it's called, which is the completion, that normally takes sort of 3 to 4 months. So from start to finish, the sale can take 3 to 4 months, unless it's a complicated one. For example, if it's an inheritance and there's 9 sellers because they've all inherited it, nieces, uncles, and whoever else, they've all got to sign, and they might all be living in different countries and things, so it can take a little bit longer. But generally speaking, the sale from start to finish is about 3 to 4 months. If all the suspensive clauses are met and it's ready to sign and it's completing, everybody signs on the same day, usually at the notaire's office. The vendor and the buyer will both be there at the same time, and they'll sign, and the keys are handed over then and there. If for whatever reason you can't be at the final signing, you can sign by proxy. The notaire can sign on your behalf, which can be set up beforehand. If you're traveling, say, from Australia or somewhere, and you can't be there on the day of the signing, it can be done for you. So yeah, that's probably, I hope that answers, but it's usually about 3 to 4 months. I will just stipulate as well, after the 10 days is up, if you haven't pulled out of the contract, and 2 months down the line you just decide, oh, I don't want to buy it now, I'm just going to pull out, that is an official legal contract, the compromis de vente, and you would possibly lose your 10% deposit for pulling out of the sale for no reason. So, when you're signing that contract, you've got to be 100%. And also, I bear in mind that there's a cost to the vendor as well, because I know in the UK you can go around and make loads of offers on different properties, and see which one gets accepted or which one goes through. In France, it's a very safe system for the buyer. Once you put that offer in and you've signed that compromis de vente, the vendor isn't going off to sell it to anyone else, because there's a penalty clause for them, and they'd have to give you 10% of the value of the property. So they don't do that so much, and you tend not to get gazumped in France for that reason as well. But the vendor has to pay the costs of all of the tests that are done, and that can range from 600 to 1,500 euros. So if you were putting offers in on 5 properties, you've got 5 vendors spending that amount of money to get all of their tests done. So again, be 100%. When you sign that compromis, you're looking at 3 to 4 months completion, and it's very straightforward, and it's a very protective sales environment when you're buying property in France. It's probably one of the safest I've known in the world from buying properties elsewhere.
That's great, Joanna. That's very good to know. We've got about 5 minutes or so left in the webinar, so let's try and get a few more questions in. So we might have to be quite brief with some of these answers. One for Tracy. Anna Spencer wants to know, We want to move permanently and run a gîte business. How much do we need to earn to be able to obtain visas?
Okay, so I could be very brief, because if I was going to say a number, I would say the national SMIC number, which is about 21,600 gross.
Sorry, can I just say what the national what number, just for the audience?
The SMIC number, which is basically the minimum earning levels in France. So apologies, that's my jargon. So the minimum earning level in France is 21,600, and that's the gross amount. So if I was going to give a number, that's the one I would give. However, I would add to this, like I said earlier, you're going to have a business and financial plan for any business activity, including GEETs. If you're not going to meet that minimum earnings level in the first year, make sure you have a very good business and financial plan which grows incrementally over 3 years, and that you have some capital behind you to support you if you're not going to have those earnings in the first year. And also make sure that you own your property before you put your business plan in, because nobody will give you a business visa for a property that isn't yours. So if you have like a second home and then you want to turn it into a gîte business, great, because the property is already yours. Or if you're buying one at the moment, make sure you've got your deed signed before you put your visa in, because like other businesses, you may not need to have the property straight away. If you're doing a gîte business, you do. And a last piece of advice on gîtes is, do make sure that you're buying something that will be viable, because if you try and renew a business visa and you have no revenue coming through, your renewal will get rejected. We've seen it happen many times before.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. Thanks, Tracy. One for Jake. Andy Jones says, do you have to make a separate French will to leave your property to family residing in the UK? And what are the tax laws, etc.? So tax laws for inheritance.
Yeah, this is quite a common one. So there's a few different options. You can use a French will, or you could use an English will, or you could use a Scottish or a Welsh will, but the English will is a lot more flexible. So with a French will, the children are massively protected. So if you're married with one child, the child's entitled to 50%, spouse 50%. With 2 kids, it's 2/3 to the children, 1/3 the spouse. With 3 kids, it's 3/4 the children, 1/4 the spouse. If there's no kids, it's half the spouse, half the parents. And if it's no kids and no parents, it's all to spouse. So very, very complicated, and can be an issue as well if you're from the UK, because it can trigger inheritance tax. So in the UK, you are still allowed to use an English will if you adopt to use an English will being in France, because UK is common law, whereas France is civil law. So if you don't have a will in the UK, you get 322,000 as the spouse and 50% of the assets. The other 50% go to kids. But if you have a will, you can distribute your assets however you want. So this is definitely the most favoured option. And the reason I say that is for inheritance tax. So again, you need to understand inheritance tax in both countries, but one thing both countries have in common is they both have what's called a spousal exemption, which means if you pass assets on to spouse, you don't pay inheritance tax. So if you can use a will where you can put down spouse instead of having to go for the forced heirship rules like you do in France, then it covers that issue. So it's definitely worth discussing this in more detail so you know which option to go to. But there is a clear difference between which one you're going to use.
That's great. Thanks, Jake. I think we've got time for one more question. Jonathan, Rosanna Allenson says, we'll be selling our house in England in order to have a deposit for another property. What's the process of moving the money to France? On the English side, it looks pretty simple, but we want to know about charges and taxes involved in France.
Okay, perfect. I mean, on the actual tax side, that's certainly something Jake would be better off perhaps to discuss. But certainly in terms of selling a property in the UK to sort of fund the money over to France, I guess it really depends if you're going to sell the property before you start looking in France. Some clients will sell the property in the UK, wait until the money is in their bank, and then start to look more seriously in France and put their offers in. If that's the route you're going down, then you've got this wallet option where you can buy the currency when you want to. I always put clients in 2 camps. Defensive, so you have a more sort of safe strategy to protect the rate that you have, and then a more speculative camp where you're sort of saying, well, look, I'm just going to do the minimum I need to now, the deposit, and then regarding the balance, as Joe said, 3 or 4 months for that acte de vente after the compromis. So you then got 3 or 4 months to look at the market. And as I said earlier, we can just update you on the market and what's happening, and then purchase the currency really at a level that you're ready to purchase at. Now, if you sell your property after you're signed the compromis de vente, so you're looking to sort of get everything landing at the same time, clearly you want the UK property to complete before France. So if you agreed the UK sort of sale today, you've already signed your compromis de vente. Let's just say you're going to complete in England in March. You're expecting to complete in France in April. What you might want to look at there, because obviously you don't have the money yet, the pounds, is the forward contract where you can fix today's rate for payment in the future. Now, there is a deposit to pay on that, typically around sort of 5% of the total. But the advantage there is you're locking in the rate so that you know in March when you get your pounds from your UK property sale, you know exactly what it's going to be buying in euros. You're not going to get any nasty surprises. Now, this is option also for Americans, and certainly looking at where the rates are. I mean, Americans, you've increased your value against the euro from dollars to euros. It's gone up since September 8%. So French property is 8% cheaper this week to Americans since September last year, and they can use these forward contracts to sort of lock in the rate at these gains. Is it going to get better? It could do. We can't guarantee you're buying at the optimum in the market, but the point is you'll know exactly what that US house sale or that British house sale is worth in euros once it comes to completion, and then you've got to send your money over to France. So as people have said, you know, there's sometimes a couple of different options with these things. It really comes down to your attitude to risk, how confident you are regarding the rates and your budget, and what's really going to suit you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So we've reached the end of our hour. Thanks very much to all the panelists for answering those questions so well. The next webinar will be on the 26th of February. You'll receive details about that by email, about how to register and so on. And you'll also receive a recording of this webinar, which is really handy if you want to go over anything you've missed or listen to anything again. Apologies if we didn't have time to answer all your questions, but all our panelists' details are on the screen, so don't hesitate to get in touch with them. They'll be delighted to hear from you and to help you further. So again, thank you for joining us. I'll just hand over to the panelists to say their farewells too. So bye from Joanna.
Hi, yeah, and just to let you know, if anybody is in London this weekend, a lot of us that are on the panel today will be at the Novotel in Hammersmith for the France Property Show. That's on Saturday and Sunday. We all have stands, and you can come to the Leggett stand and talk to Tracy, and Pauline's also there. So there's a lot of us going to be there, and Karen, of course. But if not, you know, drop us an email. We're here to help you. We do thousands of sales and have sold thousands of international clients over the years, and you know, everyone's very happy. So come and find out your information, come and see us at the show, and if not, see you on the next webinar. Bye bye for now.
Thanks, Joanna and Sharon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting evening. I hope everybody's been able to understand me, because I won't be at the show. I have a terrible cold or COVID or I don't know. But when you're looking to buy in France, plan ahead, get the information early. Planning makes for a perfect purchase. So it's been lovely to answer the questions this evening and hear all of everybody else's answers. So thank you very much, and good luck everybody with your purchase.
Thanks, Sharon, and get well soon. And over to Paulette.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. As with Joanna, we'll be at the French Property Exhibition at this weekend. We're also running 2 seminars at the exhibition about the health system in France, about healthcare, which are really, really interesting. So they're really, really worth going to. Healthcare's questions asked over and over and over again. It's one of the main things that people ask about. So if you've got any questions at all about any insurance, including healthcare, get in touch. Our website, AXA in France, really easy to find us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Paulette. And Tracy?
Yeah, so great session. I hope the questions and the answers have helped you all. LBS has been here for 15 years, helping people move, live and have business in France. We don't just deal with visas, or we do a lot of visas. We do obviously all the other paperwork process. We are a one-stop shop, so anything to do with paperwork process, visas, businesses, healthcare, driving licenses, car registrations, you name it, we can do it. So do reach out to us.
Thanks, Tracy. And Jake?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending. So as I mentioned, the two main areas we help with are Americans and Brits. So if you are moving to France and buying a property, you're also going to have to deal with the issues with pensions and investments. So that's the areas that we specialise in. So if anyone does need advice on that, please drop us a message and we can organise a no obligation review.
Thanks, Jake. And Jonathan?
Yes, thank you, Karen, for your hosting. Thank you to the other panelists. Thank you, audience, for joining us. I will also be at the France show on the Saturday, floating around. You can't miss me. I'm 6'3" and I've got a big beard, so do feel free to come up and say hello, and I can talk to you about all the markets and everything going on. The dollar, say, trading very strongly against the euro, and the pound's dipped a little bit as we started this year, but we're still up about 3 cents from some of the lower points last year. So from a currency perspective, there's many positive reasons to be buying in France. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I shall be at the exhibition. I've been on the exhibition organising team for over 20 years. So I hope to see some of you there, and come and see us on the French Property Newsstand. So once again, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Karen.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.